Ah, yeah, what a beauty. But have I got it set up right? Suspension. Do I need to change it? Catch you inside.
RevelatorAlf.
Hello, welcome to RevelatorAlf. Hope you're enjoying the channel and the series of videos. Please like, share, subscribe, leave those comments below. Check out the website RevelatorAlf.com. So in this video, I'm talking about changing your suspension. Do you need to do it? Now, let's talk about motorcycles in general, but then we'll talk about the Harleys and the Sport Glide and the Softails in particular. Now, for the most part, you get a bike, a stock bike, you buy it second hand or from a dealership or whatever. Most people never change the settings on their suspension. In fact, the suspension on stock bikes is perfectly adequate for 99.9% of all riding conditions. So why are we so eager, especially in the sort of cruiser world, to start thinking, oh, I need to start changing my suspension equipment, let's say. Now, of course, you can change the actual adjustability of each individual bike. Now, on the Softails here, or certainly on the Sport Glide here, you can only adjust the rear with a preload adjuster. The front is fixed. You can't really do anything about that at all. Other motorcycles, you can change the dampening and the preload on the front as well. But most sports bikes, sports replica bikes, allow that. Now, you could argue that you don't even need to do that if you really want to change how hard the ride is going to be, how more reactive it's going to be under braking. And most of that is if you're riding it hard and if you're going to take it to the track. Most road riding, you don't really need that. So what's the point of suspension? Well, the point of suspension is that you don't bounce along the road. So if you've ever ridden hardtails, you know you do tend to bounce along the road a little bit. It's a bit of a bone shaker, right? But the whole point about suspension is not only about absorbing impacts to make it a comfortable ride. The critical thing here is about keeping the tyre on the road. So it absorbs it and then it doesn't lift off too much, it rebounds and then the tyre is put back onto the road as soon as possible. That's what suspension really does. It's about comfort, it's about impact resistance or absorption, but it's also about keeping the tyre on the road because that's where you want it. Now, do we need to change ours on the Sport Glide, on the Softails or any Harley? If you're riding just normally, actually stock suspension is pretty good. Now lots of people say, I want to change the rear suspension, I want to lower the bike and everything. And I've talked about this in previous videos. If you watch those on the rear suspension changes, alternatives, and also the front suspension alternatives for the Harleys, for the Softails, there are options, but as soon as you start changing one, then you really have to change the other because then you're upsetting the balance of the bike. Now, here's the other thing that you've got to consider as well. If you start changing the rear suspension, you might actually get it wrong. We don't want to admit it, but that's a real possibility. So what's the best thing to do? What should we do? Should we just leave the bike alone or should we start tinkering around with it? Okay, so first of all, this is what you need to do. If you've got any kind of adjustability on the bike, with the Softails here, but any kind of bike, whatever it is, if you've got some kind of adjustability on the rear suspension, then just play around with that first of all. See how that works out for you. See if you have to change it for the weight or you're making it go a little bit more than you would normally have or that the owner's manual would say that you should have, and see how that works out for you. Experiment with that before you start changing suspension setup. Same with the front. Okay, before you start changing springs, changing cartridge inserts, or if you've got a sports bike, start adjusting all the settings. You know, see how the bike works for you, then make minor changes first of all. So many times people start tinkering with their suspension settings and they actually end up making the bike worse than it was before. Can you believe that? Making it worse than it was stock. Now, if you're taking your bike, let's say a sports bike, for example, to the racetrack, yeah, you actually want to adjust the suspension settings quite a lot because you're adjusting it to get the optimum performance for that particular track. You may have to adjust it for braking, for left side bias, right side bias. So you may adjust the front, you may adjust the rear, you may adjust the balance between the two. But for normal road riding, to stay within the legal aspect of it, actually, most stock bikes are fine. In fact, many pro racers, let's say, from the off-road world or road world, road riding world, would say actually stock bikes are absolutely fine. You don't need to change them for normal riding. It's only the very small percentage of people that need that adjustability or need changes. Now, this probably goes against convention here, but would I start changing the suspension on my Softail? Actually, no, I don't think I would. And the reason is that it's perfectly adequate for what it is, because I'm not demanding too much from it. And I think that's the question you've got to ask yourself. How much am I demanding from my bike? Do I need to change it? Can I change my riding style? That's probably a really big factor as well. Can I change my riding style for the bike that I have and still keep stock equipment? Does it still work? What percentage of time does it really work? Is it 80, 90% of the time? Or is it really about 40 or 50% of the time? If it's a lower figure, then you may want to look at alternatives. But if most of the time the suspension is absolutely fine for you, that's fine, stick with it. Now, there is a clause here, I suppose. If, let's say, you're going to go on a big adventure, on a big tour, and you're going to be changing the way you're going to be using the bike for an interim period, let's say a few months or a year or two, then yes, then you may want to look at changing suspension setups. Let's say, for example, you normally ride around by yourself and you normally ride around on just normal tarmac roads, normal highways. The bike as a stock might be perfectly fine, but let's say you're going to go on this big adventure, you're going to be on lots of dirt roads, lots of twisty roads, you're going to be two up, carrying a pillion with lots of baggage, lots of camping equipment, whatever. Stock suspension may not work for you. Now, bear this in mind. If you do make the changes and they break down, you might be stranded somewhere. However, if you've got stock equipment on your bike and you break down, you could go to the nearest Harley dealership, if you've got a Harley, for example, and they should be able to sort you out with a stock part relatively soon, relatively quickly. But that's always debatable, of course. You'll probably be able to get better stock parts a lot sooner than specialist parts. That's my point. Anyway, so there we go on this beautiful day. So I'm going to be doing a bit more riding here. And so I just wanted to bring this to you. Before you start making any suspension changes, just tinker around with it and just really understand your bike and the way you're riding and whether you really need to make any dramatic changes first of all. And if you do, then so be it. But do your research first of all. Really research what changes you're going to make and how's that going to change your ride. And will it really be the best thing to do? Are you going to improve it or make it worse? Please like, share, subscribe, leave those comments below, let us know what you think, and check out the website RevelatorAlf.com, and I'll catch you on the next video coming very soon. Ta-da now.